Is it really a question of out of sight means out of mind? Welcome to my latest number 24 Intuitive Reactions, Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenian Matters. It's been almost a year after a Russian brokered ceasefire ended the 2020 war in Nagorno-Karabakh. But a year hence, Armenia and Azerbaijan remain at loggerheads. Meantime, Baku and Yerevan have not even begun to talk about resolving post-war issues or tensions. And the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, the famous OSCE Minsk group, which has been charged with managing the peace process, stands ready to help, but Baku has been recalcitrant, saying that after the 2020 war and the change in the realities on the ground, that format of the OSCE is no longer relevant. So the tensions along the new front lines that separate Azerbaijani troops from local forces under the control of Nagorno-Karabakh's de facto authorities persist. These tensions are, by the way, also running high along the new undemarcated sections of the border between Azerbaijan and Armenia proper, where opposing forces regularly exchange fire, resulting sometimes also sadly in casualties. The area, for instance, between Armenia's Gerargunik region and the neighboring Kelbajar district, now regained by Azerbaijan, has been quite volatile. Meanwhile, amidst these tensions, politicians on all sides trade barbs, addressed both to their own constituencies and to one another. Now, going further beyond Nagorno-Karabakh itself, that small, fractured, divided enclave, and Armenia and Azerbaijan themselves, regionally also, tensions have been ramped up, particularly between Azerbaijan and Iran. And some of you might have heard or even watched on the telly the military exercises by Azerbaijan and Turkey on the one hand, and Iran on the other. And diplomatic moves of sorts continue. One of the latest that caught my eye was the visit by the Armenian president, Armen Sarkisyan, to the Holy See, to the Vatican in Rome, and a meeting with Pope Francis there. But this lack of movement, lack of mobility, lack of thrust towards some sort of negotiations, the status quo pretty much, affords international actors with very little space for engaging the conflict parties. Now, some people might say, what about Russia? And I would personally say that Russia, although it has soldiers on the ground, it is probably the most impressive presence at the moment that separates the warring parties. Russia is not entirely the only party that we should look at, because it also has very much its own Southern Caucasian interests. The USA, well, the USA time again has proved that it might talk the talk, but not necessarily walk the walk. Nonetheless, I think if we take Russia and the USA out of the equation, at least temporarily, and we look at the status quo, then we come to the European Union. That famous 27-member institution that I often refer to, that could facilitate the communication between the two protagonists enough, perhaps, in order to dampen some of these tensions. Let me remind you, in March 2020, the European Commission released a document entitled The Eastern Partnership Beyond 2020, Reinforcing Resilience, an Eastern Partnership that delivers for all, which was meant to be its policy guide toward 6 Eastern neighbors: Armenia, Azerbaijan, Belarus, Georgia, Moldova, and the Ukraine. The launch of the original Eastern Partnership in 2009 was part also of the European Neighborhood policy, which is specialized in its Eastern neighbors and is veered away from the one-size-fits-all approach to a more selective one. Now, relations are so strained at the moment that the very framework of negotiations is in limbo. I've often spoken about conflict resolution, about alternative dispute resolution. I've discussed it with scholars like Dr. Ibrahim Frehat and others. But what is clear to me is that conflict resolution, one of the things that it should have is goodwill. And for over 25 years, the OSCE Minsk group co-chairs, Russia, the USA, and France, have mediated between Azerbaijan and Armenia, although for all intents and purposes, that mediation did not resolve the issue. In fact, it brought us to a war that made the situation worse. And in the aftermath of the war of 2020, President Ilham Aliyev of Azerbaijan has declared that Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is resolved and that the OSCE Minsk process created to mediate it was therefore obsolete. Russia, the USA, and France, of course, disagreed and convened the first meeting of the Armenian and Azeri foreign ministers since the war under the auspices of the OSCE Minsk group on the sidelines, remember, of UNGA 76, the UN General Assembly, on 24th of September this year, roughly a month ago. Nevertheless, it remains to be seen whether they will be able to sway Azerbaijan to rejoin the talks. Basically, what the EU goal is or should be is to coax, alongside Russia and the US, I suppose, is to coax Baku and Yerevan to the negotiating table to discuss immediate post-war issues, such as the border demarcation and other measures that could stabilize the situation on the ground, in order to try and build up enough good faith for more discussions that would go into even more intricate situations. But the engagement, this EU engagement, does more than fill the gaps left by the stasis, the status quo of the OSCE Minsk group. EU diplomacy with Baku and Yerevan can also help define what role, if any, the OSCE Minsk group might have in future discussions, whether about borders, whether about Nagorno-Karabakh, the enclave's political status, or about humanitarian issues. The EU Special Representative for the South Caucasus for the last, I think, 3 or 4 years has been Toivo Klar. He has held many positions in Estonia, and then he was in Georgia, and is now dealing with this brief. And in my opinion, he could be well placed and mandated to continue this work. And the EU in this matter has to work with Russia. Now, EU-Russian relations aren't always easy, but I think that in contrast to other clashes that the two sides have had, when it comes to the Southern Caucasus, I think both sides will be quite happy to work together. And in fact, the Russian newly appointed representatives on the OSCE Minsk group, Ambassador Igor Khovayev, has been going and checking the region and urging both sides to return to negotiations. But there is more than just cajoling, coaxing, suggesting, engendering good faith. There is also aid. The EU is already a substantial supporter of post-war rehabilitation efforts. Brussels has allocated 7 million euros during the war to support direct humanitarian aid. In the spring of 2021, just a short while back, it promised 10 million euros more to assist with post-conflict needs, including demarking of the mines, the landmines, therefore a process of demining. And both Baku and Yerevan should welcome more help in this area. And here I would like to plug Halo Trust, which has been doing a wonderful job in Nagorno-Karabakh and on other adjacent bordering areas in their demining efforts. So would there be a possibility of using this as another carrot in terms of encouraging both parties, particularly Azerbaijan, which feels that it is the victor in the war and therefore does not need mediation anymore to come together? Possible. There are also other things that the EU could do, even if Baku and Yerevan do not talk about these items. The EU, for instance, has a multi-year assistance program within its partnership parameters, and that includes both Armenia and Azerbaijan. For instance, the potential financing of a road that cuts deeper through Armenia's mountainous territory and therefore bypasses the existing route that crisscrosses the border with Azerbaijan, and that has proven problematic. In addition, around 80 million euros in EU funding has been allocated in investment in the economic development of the southern border region of Armenia, which not only suffered the 2020 war, but now hosts both displaced people from Nagorno-Karabakh and new military positions that could easily put civil populations at risk. And the interesting thing about these border areas that Brussels could work with is that, unlike activities in Nagorno-Karabakh, the enclave itself, border region assistance raises no question of status. For starters, the EU could offer a comprehensive needs assessment mission to these border regions. Now, will all this happen? Or am I basically sort of coming out with a wish list, knowing that none of this will happen, because the reality on the ground is far, far more problematic, complicated, strained, tense, sour, call it what you may? Well, I don't know, but I am one of those people who does not go into jingoism, who does not like to sort of preclude conflict resolution attempts, even in the face of the most insuperable obstacles. And one organization that stands out amongst many others, for me personally, is Crisis Group. which has been working with all sorts of conflicts, from the Western Sahara between Morocco and the Polisario, to Israel-Palestine, to Iraq, to the Southern Caucasus, and to the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict. And in a recent briefing, it basically highlighted 4 points that it would like to see happen, and that the EU and its member states should consider. And I end this episode of my YouTube with those 4 points. The first, according to Crisis Group, is to press Baku and Yerevan, and I'm reading here, to begin talks to address post-war issues, including demarcation of the new borders between Armenia and the regions reclaimed by Azerbaijan in the 2020 war, and other measures to stabilize the situation on the ground. The second, urge the sides to enable aid to reach people in Nagorno-Karabakh who need it, even if resolution of the region's long-term status remains quite elusive. Third, work with Russia, France, and the US to keep possibilities open for the OSCE Minsk Group's return to a mediating role, and continue shuttle diplomacy to mitigate tensions and resolve immediate problems. Last but not least, fourth, explore the extension of development assistance to uncontested border areas, beginning with a comprehensive needs assessment. Based on that assessment, be prepared to support separate projects in Armenia and Azerbaijan, cross-border cooperation on non-political issues, or both. My experience, limited as it might be in the view of some, particularly in the Southern Caucasus, is that it is not easy. We have seen the feelings on both sides, which are very, very strong. The Armenians feel aggrieved and the Azerbaijanis feel aggrieved for different reasons. Yet, if we go to the basics, that we are all human beings meant to live on the face of this same earth. And if we agree that it is better to live next to each other rather than to kill each other, maybe mediation, facilitation, alternative dispute resolution, less pomposity and acerbic statements might actually help reach that objective. I leave it there, and I hope that what I'm saying will have some resonance, some echo somewhere. Take care, and all the best.